Our Wednesday night class in Hollywood, Florida. We are studying the Zera Shimshon with our weekly study. We would like to acknowledge our sponsors for this evening in no specific orders, just in the order that I got them in. Firstly, our dear friend Barry and Carol Lynn. Barry is with us this evening in memory of Carol's older brother Beryl Rose. Also, his Hebrew name is Aryeh Dov ben Shmuel Zev. So may his neshama have an aliyah, and he should have great, tremendous merit from the studying that we're doing this evening on his behalf. We'd also like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Barry and Eliza Reichenberg for co-sponsoring this evening as well for their anniversary. Mazel tov. Mazel tov, mazel tov. It's a surprise from Barry, okay? Yeah. So mazel tov, mazel tov. I'd also like to thank our third sponsor, Joel and Jacqueline Goldman, for sponsoring this evening. Thank you very much, Joel. Jacqueline and Joel Goldman. And a refuah shlema for Yaakov Azriel ben Gedalia Shlomo. Amen. Last sponsor is an anonymous sponsor from Ottawa, Canada. And may her and her whole family have a tremendous source of blessing. Amen. This week's Torah portion is following, obviously, last week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion was following the one before, and I'm not saying that to bore you, I'm just telling you that because we got the Torah, that was 2 weeks ago. Last week we spoke about specific laws, the mishpatim. A lot of civil law was being discussed in last week's Torah portion. And this week we go to a complete polar opposite. It was all like between man and their fellow human beings. And this week it now transcends to more of the spiritual realm, although it's definitely physical because it's the mandate of the construction of the tabernacle, the portable temple that was used during their 40 years of traveling in the wilderness. However, it is interesting to note the complete polar opposite of topic compared to last week's Torah portion. And anyone who would like to open up, it's a very easy number to find yourself on page 444 in the Art Scroll Chumash, 444. Right off the bat, there are many, many questions. The truth is we're going to spend this evening on the second verse of this Torah portion. Can you imagine 1 whole hour just on the second verse, and there's only a couple of words in it that we're going to pay attention to. So I hope that you won't be bored. It says as follows. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and God speaks to Moses saying, Daber el bnei Israel, tell the Jewish people to do the following, Veikchu li Terumah, which means, I'll translate it loosely, to donate towards the contribution of the building of the tabernacle, of the building of the temple. Met kol ish asher yidivenu libo tikchu et terumati, from every single person, anyone who can, anyone who feels like they'd want to be a part of this greater cause, let them come and join this amazing campaign. As we'll soon see, this was the first and only campaign that those who were collecting the funds had to say, stop, we have enough. That has never happened before, and I doubt if that will ever... Yes, haven't happened since, and I doubt if it will ever happen. So that was the first, and it was in a speed, record-breaking amount of time. It was within 3 days of the announcement that all of the contributions were already collected. The contributions all involved gold and silver and copper and wood and all the different type of wools and beautiful and expensive jewels. All came very close. Now again, you can't compare it to any other type of campaign. This is a campaign for God, but every campaign is for God, right? No, but this is the campaign for God's own home that was the connection, the fusion of the spiritual and the physical aspects of God that we were able to be open to in this very world. The main question on the first verse is quite simple. The Torah tells us to give a contribution. However, any of us who understand the Hebrew language understand that the word vayikchu means to take. So how am I taking a donation by really giving it towards this worthy cause? It's a very, very obvious question. I'm going to present the question, the answer in a very elementary yet very proper way, and then we're going to take the class all the way till the end and tie it right back. So, consider the following story. Some of you may have heard me say this story once upon a time. There were two great friends, Mark and Irving, and they were both going out on a fishing trip. And while they were out, they were unfortunately caught by a very, very serious storm. And after 2 hours of being flung around in their little boat, back and forth, well, unfortunately, Irving falls over. And he's there, and he's treading water, he's trying to swim for his dear life. And at a certain point, Mark, who's back in the boat, he's paddling over to Irving and he says, "Give me your hand!" And Irving is just standing like that. And Mark is screaming at the top of his lungs, "Give me your hand, I want to save you!" And Irving just, I don't want to say stood, he was treading, but then he just was just giving a blanket stare at Mark, and he drowned and died. Very tragic, very severe. Finally, Mark gets back to shore when the whole storm settles down, and he sees Irving's wife, and Mrs. Irving asks Mark, "How couldn't you save my husband? He was on the boat with you." I tried. "Well, what were you doing?" He was saying, "Give me your hand, give me your hand." "Oh, you're so dumb. My husband never gave anything to anyone. You should have said, 'Take my hand,' not 'give me my hand.'" Now, obviously it's not a real story, because even people who only take in life will give their hand to save their life. But this funny parable is a true lesson to the way we have to start viewing when we give of ourselves. Now, obviously, in this week's Torah portion, it's talking about giving, contributing monetarily towards the building of the temple. But the truth is anytime we give, we're giving of ourselves in whatever capacity we're able to. And we will speak later about this during the class. But when a person gives of their time, of their advice, of their expertise, of their sweat equity labor, of their wealth that God blessed them with, whatever it is that a person is giving, we need to start focusing and redefining it as taking. Because in truth, as the Mishnah tells us, that there are many, many messengers to God. Meaning, when there's something good that has to happen, it will get done. The question is, who's going to be the first person to jump up to the grand occasion and take the merit for it? And the truth is for the negative also. When someone needs to be punished or a calamity has to take place, it will get done. But who's going to be the unfortunate individual that is going to be the messenger to carry that out for God Almighty? And therefore, when it comes to the contribution for this great, great home of God, the tabernacle, the Torah tells us you are taking a contribution. Yes, you are actually physically parting of something that you've earned, that you've got. Again, most of them picked it up on their way out of Egypt or by the shore, but it was still theirs. And therefore, when they gave it, it was really taking. When we start focusing our giving as really taking, because we are taking that great merit, then that makes giving a lot easier for those who have a hard time giving. We're going to put that on pause because we're going to get right back to that at the end. I want to go through a quick synopsis of what's going on time-wise, because the Torah portions are out of order. It's going to be only in 2 weeks from now where we speak about the sin of the golden calf, but we know that the command that God gave the Jewish people to build the tabernacle, and this is next week's Torah portion, and for the vestments of the Kohens, all the Kohanim, and the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, were all given afterwards as an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. So just to put things chronologically in order, I would like to thank my dear friend Ron Friedman for giving me this card to using it as a bookmark. Thank you, Ron. Okay, anyone who needs any CPA services, you know who to call. That's Friedman CPA Group. Ron, it was worth putting it in here. Okay, we're on page, this is only the new. Anyone tuning in online, unfortunately in the room we don't have them. Anyone who has the new version of the Art Scroll Chumash, which is an absolute masterpiece. They added at the back some color diagrams with some timetables at the same time. So if anyone's following or tuning in, listening to later on, you're not going to find it in here. Okay? maybe at home you'll have it. It's on page 1332. There is a very nice diagram of the chronology of Moses' ascending and descending the Mount Sinai. And I'm just going to go through it very briefly because I want us to have in mind and understand when all of this is taking place in the dates. So again, it was in the month of Nisan of the year 2448 that the Jewish people exited Egypt, right? That's Passover. So Passover, Nisan, that's the Jewish month. That's, according to the Torah, the first month, right? Tishrei is the first month for counting of the years, but really Nisan is the beginning of the new year because that's when the Jewish people were redeemed and that major exodus took place of when we were freed of bondage. So in the year 2448 Nisan, fast forward almost 2 months, we find ourselves by the 7th of Sivan. The 7th of Sivan was the first time Moses ascends Mount Sinai. I want to repeat that. He first presents the 10 Commandments with God, as we'll explain, that day, and then he's called up to ascend the mountain for 40 days. That takes us to the 16th of Tammuz, when the Jewish people aired when he was going to come back. On the 17th is when they actually created the golden calf and worshipped it. On the 18th of Tammuz, the 17th, he comes down, he breaks the tablets and crushes it up, makes them drink from it, and the very next day he comes back up again, 40 days and 40 nights. That's the second time he goes up. Takes us to the 29th of Av. Okay? 29th of Av, Moses comes back down. He sees that they have not sinned, thank God. Okay, everything is status quo where he left it. Not something so, what's the word I'm looking for? Not something to be expected all the time. Okay, then on the 1st of Elul, Moses is summoned up again for a third time to Mount Sinai. Again, the first time was to learn the Torah, the whole Torah, the rest of the 613. The second time was to ask forgiveness on behalf of the Jewish people for sinning in the golden calf. And the third time was for Moses to again relearn the Torah and come back down with the second tablets. He comes back down on a very auspicious day. What's the most important day in our Jewish calendar, no matter how observant or connected you are? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur everyone observes. And therefore, it was on Yom Kippur, the 10th of Tishrei, Moses comes down after 3 flights, we'll call it, up to the top of the mountain, coming down with the second tablets. It was that very next day, so if you turn 2 pages to 1335, if you're following in this beautiful new Chumash, it tells us a very clear timeline of the commanding and the dedication and the building of the Mishkan. It was the very next day, on the 11th of Tishrei, that this week's Torah portion takes place, of God commanding the Jewish people to start collecting the contributions for the building of the tabernacle. That happens on the 11th. Between the 11th, 12th, and 13th, already all funds are brought in, and everyone says, not everyone, Moses has to come and say, stop donating. Right at that time is probably when others started opening up 501c3s, and then there was always trying to collect in other ways. But at least for the tabernacle, for the Mishkan, the collection was put to a halt because they had what they needed. Okay, and then at another time we'll speak about the rest of the building. Please refer again to the appendix and the charts at the end of the Chumash. Going back to this week's Torah portion. The Zera Shimshon quotes a midrash. This midrash quotes our pasuk of V'ikhu Terumah, that we should give, which means take, a contribution for God's home, for the tabernacle. He quotes a verse that King Solomon writes. It's in Mishle. It is chapter 4, verse 2, and I quote, Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al ta'azovu. And translated means as follows: I have given you a good gift, my Torah, do not forsake it. This is what King Solomon writes, and the Midrash quotes this verse in relation to our very verse of contributing towards the Mishkan, towards the building of this tabernacle. The Zera Shimshon continues the quoting of the verse. Now the Midrash continues and says, based on this verse, the Midrash wants to discuss some 3 very special virtues that the Torah has, specifically in comparison to the way that the world runs. So listen to these examples. I'll tell you the Midrash, and then the Zera Shimshon explains the Midrash in a very beautiful way. The first is when somebody has something, some item, and normally an item is either gold or, as the Midrash says, silver. Very rarely is there an item that is gold and silver. I guess this predated two-tone watches, right? But even that's not silver, right? Okay, but normally the Midrash says something that an object that a person has is either gold or silver. The Torah is different, the Midrash says. Now you're going to have plenty of questions on the Midrash, so just listen to hear me out and we'll understand it. When it comes to the Torah's reward is gold and silver, opposed to either or, and we'll understand what that means. The second comparison that the Midrash says is normally lands are specific to what will be grown on it. You have fields which grow plants, and you have vineyards or orchards to plant trees. But normally you don't have a land that's multifunctional, that you could do many, many different things on it. The Torah is different. The Torah's, as we're going to soon explain, the Torah allows a person to have a field and a vineyard all coincide. And we'll explain that in a moment. The third thing the Midrash says, and this one's very interesting, says that normally when someone buys something, you don't know how much it costs. I mean, nowadays there's public records, especially for real estate, but prior to that, or other items that there are no public records on, you don't really know how much someone paid for something. But do you know how you could tell? You get a good indication by finding out what the middleman's commission was. Right? Well, there's different rules in real estate. It could be 2%, 3%, 6%. Depends if there's 2 agents working on it. But at that, you're able to figure out what the sale or the purchase price was. The same thing is for any other type of item, whether it's cars, whether it's jewelry, whatever the item is, based on the middleman's commission, you can start approximating how much the sale or purchase price was. By Torah, though, we can't figure that out. And now who's the middleman when it comes to Torah? Moses. Moses was the middleman. Moses was the messenger of God who brought the Torah down and taught it to us because, as we'll explain, the Jews said, we can't bear God's strong voice penetrating into our ears, into our hearts. They passed away every time, every word God said, they died and they were revived. Until after the first 2 commandments, they said, okay, that's it. We can't die and revive constantly like this. We need just Moses, just give it to us, watered down. At least we'll understand it. This is what the Midrash says. So again, the Midrash quotes this verse from King Solomon, and then it gives us 3 dynamic virtues that the Torah is different to in contrast to the world that we live in. One is that idea of gold and silver. The second was fields and vineyards. And the third is this whole idea of commission and the middleman, that's maybe an indicator of the value of something, but that doesn't work so for Torah. Comes Zera Shimshon, says this Midrash makes absolutely no sense. We've got to make sense of this. So he says that there are 3 different aspects of Torah. Beautiful way he writes it. So the first aspect in Torah is, I want to find the right verbiage. The first requires action. The second aspect of Torah requires learning and understanding of the Torah. And the third is concepts which are beyond us that we cannot grasp, such as mysticism. These are the 3 aspects. So there's action, there's learning, and there's what's beyond us. The Zera Shimshon says the Midrash is alluding to all three of these through these interesting comparisons and contrasts between the Torah and the world that we live in. He starts off with the first. The first of action, required action, refers to, obviously, fulfilling mitzvot. And when a person fulfills a mitzvah, we have to remind ourselves that any mitzvah, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how hard or how easy, has tremendous reward. He brings a proof. He says, do you think it's by chance that there are only 2 mitzvahs in our whole Torah that promise longevity? I'm opening to the crowd. Who knows which 2 mitzvahs promise longevity? No. Parents. Good. Honoring parents and the birds. So again, honoring thy father and thy mother, and respecting them, obviously. And the second is shiluach haken, when you shoo away the mother bird away from the little babies. Which one's harder? The Midrash tells us it's much, much, much harder to honor and respect your parents than shooing away a mother bird from its babies. Yet they both give the merit of longevity. Comes from this teaching, the Zera Shimshon says, that is another proof that no matter what mitzvah a person does, we can't even grasp the amount of merit and reward we get from it, because it's not based on how big it was and all the fanfare that was behind it, or how hard it was specifically. Rather, anything that a person does, any mitzvah that a person does, has tremendous reward. He continues to say that when your friend does a mitzvah, and maybe you do a mitzvah, and their mitzvah looks way grander. Imagine there's like a science fair, like a mitzvah fair, right? Imagine there's a mitzvah fair, and there's one winner to the mitzvah fair. Barry, note that, okay? Instead of a science fair, a mitzvah fair. So, and there's one grand winner of the mitzvah fair, and you look at them and say, "Oh, I wish I could do a mitzvah like that person." Don't discount, the Zera Shimshon says, don't discount the mitzvah that you did, because no one really knows how much reward the person gets, and the truth is there is a tremendous amount of reward that each and every person gets when they fulfill a mitzvah. This is in contrast to reward in this world. Reward in this world is all based on productivity, the bigger the better, the more the better. That's this world. That is olam hazeh, this world. Opposed to the reward one receives for all of the good deeds that they do, partly in this world, but primarily in the world to come, is all exponential. And therefore, the Zera Shimshon says this is one virtue of the Torah, of the required action, the fulfilling of mitzvot, which you cannot compare to the reward of things in this world. That's the first. The second, the Zera Shimshon tells us, is the learning and understanding of Torah. In this world, like we said, there's fields, there's orchards and vineyards, and each are respective to the type of plant or tree that is planted on it, and the fruits that come from it. See, the Torah is different. The Zera Shimshon says a person that learns Torah, a person that digs deep and toils in Torah, is not only able to activate and he uses a good word over here, to cultivate only one type of novelty. Rather, a person who delves deep into Torah is able to cultivate all types of novelty. Novelties in the realms of halacha, Jewish law, or studying of the Bible, of the Chumash, or it could be Talmud, it could be practical law, it could be esoteric, it could be things that we really understand or maybe less understand. However, the novelties are not channeled and limited to one type of fruit, as land is, such as fields or vineyards or orchards. However, when one digs deep and plants in Torah, the fruit that it bears is not only specific, however, it also is part of a whole spectrum of different novelties and understanding. That's the second. The third is something which is beyond our grasp, specifically mysticism. Now, a person may feel, the Zera Shimshon says, that the value of the Torah is known. And this is a great mistake. Meaning, when a person That's a very good ringtone for it. That a person may think that the Torah can be completely understood. Now, I don't want to, and the Zera Shimshon doesn't mean to discourage anybody, but the truth is no matter how deep a person gets into Torah study, I'll tell you a secret. There's always deeper. Yes, we say that there's only 70 facets or 70 faces of understanding Torah, but within each of the 70, there's another 70 and another 70. It's limitless. It's infinite. That is the depth of the Torah. And even when a person learns deep concepts, whether they may be esoteric, whether it be mysticism, and they might know something that maybe others don't know that there is still more. This is in contrast to items in this world, where you could either find out exactly how much it's worth, or you can approximate well based on the commission of the middleman. So now the Zera Shimshon says, what was the commission of our middleman, of Moses? When he came down from Mount Sinai, his face was glowing. He had these two beams of light coming out of his forehead, which is the major misconception that many Gentiles and artists have, that Moses came down with horns. They don't understand, or maybe they do, but at least they probably don't understand that the same word of Keren, Kuf, Resh, and Nun, which means a horn, when the Torah says it, meant it as karan, it shone. The light was shining out of his forehead because he had this spiritual experience with the Almighty that no man has ever had or will ever have again. One may think, we know what the value and the depth of the Torah is based on the middleman's reward. Not so. You see, the Zera Shimshon says, Moses was given that, you want to call it commission, that gift, as a gift from God. It was something that God gifted him. He says the same thing is true. When a person gets very deep into Torah study, what they understand, yes, they're activating their mind and their brain to understand, but the truth is, when you get to a certain depth, God gifts it to us. Which is very, very nice to know. So out of this first segment, the Zera Shimshon, I want to recap it with 3 different lessons. The first lesson, and this all has to do with the virtues of the Torah. The first is that all mitzvot have a very specific and valuable reward. Don't discount anything, unlike when we're able to think that we're able to quantify whatever is in this world. That's the first. The second is proper studying and understanding of our Torah allows us to tap into all different sorts and types of novelties and area in understanding of the Torah and of our lives and ourselves. The third is that even when there are concepts which are beyond our grasp and maybe esoteric and there's even mysticism involved, there is still hope that if a person delves deep into it, God can gift them the understanding to those very complex subjects. This is the first segment. Listen to the next part of the Zera Shimshon. The Zera Shimshon tells us, he brings another midrash. There's going to be a series of midrashim over here, but I spent hours on organizing it as clear as possible. So may with the help of Hashem, as well as the help of the Zera Shimshon, it come out very clear because it is so sweet and so beautiful. This gives us a real new understanding on many different topics that all revolve around this contribution towards the Mishkan and that standing of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. So listen to the following. The Zera Shimshon quotes a midrash. This midrash tells us that our pasuk is also spoken about elsewhere in our Torah. Our verse that says, V'ikhu li terumah, that you should take for me, you should give, contribute towards the building of the Mishkan, it's spoken about elsewhere. It's spoken about also in Deuteronomy chapter 34, I believe. 33 verse 4, where the Torah says, Torah tzivalanu Moshe, morasha kihilat Yaakov, which is a very famous line. It is actually the first line and song that we teach our children when they are able to sing. Torah tzivalanu Moshe, morasha kihilat Yaakov, no matter which accent you have, this is what we teach our children right at the beginning. Again, that's chapter 33 in the book of Deuteronomy, verse 4. I'll read you the translation. The translation reads as follows. Moshe commanded us to keep the mitzvot of the Torah. It is a legacy for the congregation of Jacob. Then the Midrash continues. Rav Simlai, one of the Midrashic rabbis, says that in total there is 613 mitzvot. We know this. And he says that is the equal numerical value, the gematria, of the word Torah. If you take the word Torah, Taf gives you 400. Vav is 6. Resh is 200. Hey is 5. That gives you how much? 611. Okay, good. You guys are following. Okay. So the Midrash also tried to trick us, but it said no. Torah equals 611. That's too shy of 613. Where do we get those other two from? Those were the two that God himself proclaimed, those first two of the 10 commandments at Mount Sinai. When God comes down and says, Anochi Hashem, and then he says the second one of Lo yeh lecha elokim acharim, I am God, and you should have no other God, those two were given to by God. But the Torah tziva lanu Moshe, the Torah that Moses taught us, was the numerical value of Torah, 611, because he said the subsequent 8, and then the rest of them ever, the next 603. Okay? These were the ones given by Moses. And then the Midrash ends off, Rav Simlai says, do not read the verse as Morasha Ki'ilat Yaakov, that it's a legacy for the congregation of Jacob. Rather, read it as Yerusha Ki'ilat Yaakov, that it should be an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. This is what the Midrash says. Again, ambiguous, like many Midrashim, especially presented through the lenses of the Zera Shimshon, as always. Now, the Zera Shimshon asks two powerful questions. Question number 1, what is the relevance and what does the Midrash mean that says our pasuk of Vikhuli Terumah, of donating, contributing towards the Mishkan, have to do with that verse of Moses commanding us, teaching us, giving us the rest of the Torah? What do the two have to do with them? Meaning, the first time, the first pasuk, the Midrash quotes our verse. And then it says, on this verse it tells us, Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morasha Ki'ilat Yaakov. The Zera Shimshon wants to know, what is the relevance between these two verses? One is speaking about a contribution towards God's home, and another is talking about Moses teaching the Jewish people the Torah. It's like apples and oranges, right? At the end of the day, they're both fruits, but they're different. Okay? That's his question number 1. Question number 2, the Zera Shimshon asks, what's the difference between Morasha and Yerusha? Meaning, what's the difference between a legacy and an inheritance? Is there a difference? We'll discuss it. The Zera Shimshon will discuss it. And therefore, the Zera Shimshon finished up by saying, to what right does this Midrashic rabbi, Rav Simlai, say, change the word in the Torah? Meaning, obviously, write it as Morasha, but read it as Yerusha. Read it as inheritance. Don't read it as a legacy. To what right does this rabbi have to changing it like that? We haven't seen this anywhere else. At least not this way. These are the two questions. Again, the relevance and the difference between inheritance versus legacy. The Zera Shimshon gives a preface to his answer by quoting 3 midrashim. 2 of them are similar, 1 is a little different, and his interpretation on them. With these 3 midrashim that I'm going to present to you, we're going to go A, B, and C. The Zera Shimshon then goes on to answer these 2 questions. It's going to fit together like a beautiful puzzle. Okay? Number 1, the first midrash tells us that when the Jewish people were being given the Torah by God, the Midrash says that when they were going to learn the Torah then and forevermore, they were never going to forget any Torah that they learned. I will be the first to confess, and each of us will all agree that we do not remember all the Torah we learn or we have learned. Why is this? It's because it's something that happened when the Torah was being given to us that it was lost. that the forgetfulness of learning Torah came into effect. The Zera Shimshon explains based on this midrash. The midrash says that when the Jewish people were listening to the Torah, they would never forget. As soon as they said, Moses, you continue, we can't anymore, boom, they invited the concept of forgetting the Torah that they learned. Okay? As soon as they said, Moses, we can't take it from God, we want it from you, which is disrespectful to God, then any Torah that they would ever learn again, unfortunately, would be able to be forgotten. The problem is, Zera Shimshon says, the Talmud tells us, in Masechet Eruvin, I believe, Eruvin, page 54a, tells us that it wasn't the fact that we asked for Moses to tell us the rest of them. It was really the fact that Moses broke the tablets that brought forgetfulness to the Jewish people, meaning that they would forget Torah that they learned. So which one is it that Zera Shimshon says? He says it's a combination. Really, when the Jewish people came and they said, Hashem, we can't listen it from you, we need it from Moses, they welcomed forgetfulness. However, it wasn't sure that they would always forget Torah forevermore, whatever they learned. When Moses came and broke the tablets out of his, I'm putting in quotations, we'll speak about it, his anger of breaking the tablets for the sin of the golden calf, that is when the deal was signed that unfortunately, when we learn Torah, we will not remember everything we learn. Again, the only trick to remembering anything in life, especially Torah, is review, obviously. However, forgetfulness was entered into forgetting Torah was brought in because we said, God, we can't listen to it from you, we need it from Moses. Next midrash, this is B, all part of the preface. The second midrash that Zera Shimshon says is very similar. When the Jewish people were standing at Mount Sinai, they heard the first two commandments. They said, we can't hear it from you, it's too painful for us, we need to hear it from Moses. At that point, let me repeat that, when God was saying the first two commandments, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, was removed completely from the hearts of the Jews, the Midrash says. The same evil inclination that became part and parcel with humanity by the eating of the tree of knowledge. When God revealed himself at Mount Sinai, gave those first two commandments, it was removed. It was supposed to stay removed. The Midrash says when the Jews asked for Moses to continue saying the rest of the commandments, it came back. However, it came back on condition. It came back to see, will the Jewish people now go through the next 40 days of committing themselves to God, and therefore we can remove it. We know that that wasn't the case, because within 40 days, sin of the golden calf. And from that moment and on, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, stayed part and parcel with humanity, specifically in this concept, the Jews, and it would be an everlasting struggle until Mashiach comes. That's the second. So the first was forgetfulness, the second one was evil inclination, and the third midrash, a little different in nature, says, you know why God's home is called a Mishkan? Tabernacle, loosely translated, but in Hebrew vernacular means very, very special, Mishkan. Mishkan, the midrash says, comes from the word mashkon. Mashkon is a collateral, meaning when I lend you something, you're going to give me something to hold on to as a collateral just in case I need to exert that power and hold on to it, or keep it, or sell it, whatever the case is. The Midrash says that when God gave the Jewish people the Torah, He prepared for them a collateral. He prepared for them something that He, if needed, would have to take away, opposed to destroying the Jews themselves. And what was that? God's home. As we know, the temples were destroyed. The temples were also not built by Moses, so this way God could, so to say, unleash His wrath on the stone and this building, opposed to the Jewish people. It is considered a mashkon, a collateral. God prepared this collateral. It's a weird type, because normally the collateral is held by, right? If I lend you something, I hold the collateral. No, here God gifts us the Torah, and He gives us this collateral. And if unfortunately we will not stay on track, He'll take back, he'll remove, he'll destroy the collateral. He did this as a protection mechanism, the Midrash says, for the Jewish people. That's why the Mishkan is called a Mishkan, because it's from the same word as collateral, mashkon. These are the three introductory midrashim that Zera Shimshon uses to answer his original questions. Let's just recap those questions. Again, the relevance between our verse of V'ikchu Terumah, give/take a contribution, and Torah tziva lanu Moshe Marasha Kilat Yaakov, that Moses was the one who brought the Torah down to the Jewish people, and it would be a heritage, legacy, changed to a inheritance. And then the second question is, what's the difference between inheritance and legacy? Comes Zera Shimshon and explains that the original midrash, that midrash that we quoted originally, that right, with that verse and what Rav Simlai was doing, is coming to explain our verse of V'ikchu Terumah. You see, he says, normally when you give something, a contribution, nowadays we call it a truma, but it's really called a nedava. Nedava is a gift. When you gift something to someone else, when you contribute money towards a cause, it is really properly in the Hebrew language is called a nedava. It's coming from me, it's a gift from me to that cause. Why is it over here referred to as a terumah? They sound very similar, but they're completely different. So the Zera Shimshon explains that our verse, in essence, is being explained why it says terumah and not nedava, based on the verse of Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Now look how he does it. He says, the Zohar tells us that the word terumah, if you spell it out, if you're taking notes, you have taf, resh, vav, mem, and hey, can also be rearranged to Torah, mem. Torah, obviously. Mem, which is the numerical value of 40. Why? Because the Torah wasn't given all at once to the Jewish people. It was given to them as first the 10 Commandments, and it was within a span of 40 days that it was all, I'm saying intended because it wasn't really, but it was all intended to be given within 40 days, meaning the first 10, and then at least to Moses it was given within those 40 days. It was a 40-day span. And the Zera Shimshon explains the following. He says, why couldn't God just give the Torah to Moses and the Jewish people in one shot? Does God need 40 days to download 613 laws, 5 books, 54 parashas into Moses' brain? I mean, we have computers today which can do faster than that. Right? Does God need 40 days to give it to Moses? Did Moses really need all of that time to understand it? The Zera Shimshon gives 3 answers. First answer he gives is from the Megaleh Mukot, a mystical author. The Zera Shimshon's quoted him before. He says as follows. Moses didn't stop learning from God for 40 days and 40 nights straight. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He was the only human being to ever experience this. Take a mathematician. Where's the card? If we do, how many hours are there in a day? 24. Yeah, there's 24 in your day? 25. Okay, fine. 24. Now do 24 times 40. Okay, I think I'm faster than you. Should be... Oh, wow, you're faster. Very good. 960 hours. The Megaleh Mukot says that Moses specifically needed 40 days to total up to 960 hours of downloading time. You know why? Because the numerical value of 960 is also the word matnitin. Matnitin is the Aramaic way to say, the Aramaic translation of the word Mishnah. Mishnah is all the oral Torah. Moses wasn't just going up and getting, is that amazing? Moses wasn't just going up and getting the 613 mitzvot. He was getting all 613 and their explanation to their very core and understanding. And how would that come about? After 960 hours specifically. That's one reason. It's nice, it's cute. Next, The Zera Shimshon says something very, very fascinating. It's actually not on this week's Torah portion. It's in Parashat Kitisa, but Baruch Hashem, I chanced upon it. God made me find it. And listen to this second answer. Second answer the Zera Shimshon says is, the Talmud tells us every day during those 40 days, Moses learned the Torah from God. And next day, we can't say that he went to sleep and he woke up and he forgot it. But the next day, he forgot everything he learned the previous day. That happened on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Look how patient God is in his realm. Every day he's teaching Moses the whole Torah, forgets it. On the 40th day, the Talmud says, God gifted the whole Torah to Moses that he should remember it. Why? Why did he have to learn it and forget it and learn it and forget it 40 times? The Zera Shimshon quotes the Alshech as well as the Siftei Kohen, two great Torah scholars and authors in their own right, that explain the following. Was Moses mortal? Answer, yes. Moses died. He was a human being. He was born just like any one of us, and he passed away just like any one of us. He was a human being. He had great accomplishments in his life, and he even made mistakes in his life. He was a mortal being. He was not a god. Because of that, it was too high of a level for Moses to conceptualize, to be a receptacle of this downloading process of the Torah. He just couldn't hold it from what God was giving to him. And therefore, he had to learn it and forget it 40 times to undo, so to say, to decompose his basic mortal aspects. And what do I mean by that? See, during conception, the first 40 days of conception are the most vulnerable and the most important. And it's after 40 days of conception that the gender of the fetus is decided. And anything that happens post 40 days is just a continuation of evolution and growth based on the first 40 days. These two rabbis explain, the Alshech and the Siftei Kohen explain, that Moses had to undo his mortal creation of when he was in his mother's womb of those 40 days. How was he going to do that? He was going to learn and forget and spend 40 days doing that to undo those 40 days when he was in his mother Yochevet's womb for those 40 days. And that's why God needed 40 days. The truth is, he could have done it in 1 second. Okay? These are two answers which are unrelated to the grand scheme of what we're trying to understand this evening. Right? Yeah. However, I just thought they were absolutely fascinating that I had the need to share them to you, especially since the Zera Shimshon does bring it down. Now, listen to the answer which ties everything together for our purposes of understanding this midrash, again, for the relation between V'chuli Terumah and Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov. Listen to what the Zera Shimshon says. He says, you know what God's original plan was? This was a shocker to me when I learned this for the first time. God's plan was for him to say all 10 commandments to the Jewish people, and then immediately after, give the rest of the 603. There was never supposed to be 40 days, the Zera Shimshon says. What brought along the 40 days? When the Jews said, we can't hear it from you, God, we need to hear it from Moses. What did they do? They brought in forgetting Torah, and they brought in the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. But those two were given, as we saw, on a trial basis. Let's see how you behave over the next 40 days. If you commit yourself to God, you prove your commitment to only God, then we'll get rid of forgetting Torah. We'll get rid of the evil inclination. And then everything will be fine. But it was the Jews that caused, as the Zera Shimshon says, a delay in learning the whole Torah, being given the whole Torah in one instance by God. Because they said, we can't hear it from you, we need to hear it from Moses. Then they messed up with the golden calf on their 40-day trial period, and that is what sealed their decree to always forget Torah and, unfortunately, continue living with the evil inclination until Mashiach, until the Messiah. Now, the Zera Shimshon says, you may come and wonder, well, now what hope do we have? What hope do we have to ever ridding ourselves from forgetting Torah and from the evil inclination? Our collateral is taken. The tabernacle is buried. No one knows where it is. First temple built and destroyed. Second temple built and destroyed. Where's our collateral? What chance do we have to breaking out of this overpowerment and control that the evil inclination has over us, as Zera Shimshon says, one may come and say? To that, our original midrash of Rabbi Simlai, he came and said, you know what? Regard our Torah as, or read the verse as a Yerusha, as an inheritance, opposed to a legacy. And now he explains what the difference between the two is. He says, you know what the Jews may have thought back then? Well, Moses is mortal. We just proved it. He was born from a human. He died. What will happen when he dies? Maybe the Torah that he brought to us and that he taught us will all go with him. And then, as the Jewish nation will be left empty-handed, the Zera Shimshon says, the Jews may proclaim. It's a big issue. We had this whole high, these miracles, 10 plagues, the revelation, the wandering and miraculously surviving in the desert, all these promises for the future, but Moses goes, the Torah goes with him. To that the Torah comes and tells us, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morsha kilat Yaakov, Moses taught us the Torah, but it is an everlasting inheritance to the Jews, specifically inheritance. He says, why? The difference between an inheritance and a legacy or a heritage is the following. An inheritance is something which is gifted automatically, whether a person is worthy or not. A legacy in heritage is something that a person has to work for, to attain, and to grasp, and to keep. Right? When a person passes away, they leave over a Yerusha to their children. They leave over an inheritance to their children. Children can go their whole lives twiddling their thumbs, and their parent passes away, and everything falls silver platter, golden spoon, as they say. Did they work hard for it? No. Are they smart enough to know what to do with it? Absolutely not. That's an inheritance. But the Zera Shimshon says at the end of the day, the Torah says, Morasha, it's a heritage and a legacy. This is a punchline. Get ready. He says, that when you treat the Torah as a legacy and a heritage, and I'll explain how, then it will forevermore be an inheritance. The Torah says legacy, morasha. But the Torah also, the Midrash says, read it as inheritance. You know why? When you treat it like a legacy and heritage, it will be an everlasting inheritance. What does that mean practically? The Zera Shimshon says, when you toil to learn Torah in its greatest depth, to understand it, to teach it to your children and pass it on from generation to generation like a legacy, like a heritage, you are guaranteed to have it as an inheritance that is everlasting. Now the Zera Shimshon says, but that's good for people who know how to learn Torah, or who could learn Torah, or have time to learn Torah. What about everybody else? The Zera Shimshon says, that's why God is telling us, Veikhu li Terumah. God says, if you're able to do that, if you're able to learn Torah, give me that. That's what I want from you. That's what Moses did. That's what I wanted from him. If you can't, give what you have. Give your expertise. Give your talent. Give your God-given wealth. Give it to Torah. Give it towards this inheritance. Turn it into a heritage, a legacy, and it will be an inheritance that is everlasting, the Zera Shimshon explains. This all puts together the relevance between our verse of Veikhu li Terumah as well as Torah tziva lanu Moshe Marasha. He explains it as follows. He says, first, when you faulted when you asked Moses to give it to you. That's Torah tziva lanu Moshe. You faulted there. What was the fault? You caused a 40-day delay. That's Terumah. Torah, Mem. The Torah had a 40-day delay. What is the atonement for it? The atonement for it is the Mishkan. You see, when you're able to give to God through Torah study, that's what He wants. But when you can't, well then you contribute towards His home. You contribute towards the everlasting heritage, legacy, and inheritance of God and the Jewish people. He ends off by saying that it could have just said Yikhu li Terumah. take for me, give. It says and. Why is there a vav? Why is there and give? Because it's coming to continue on the great gift, on the great contribution that Moses gave to God. Moses gave himself as the messenger. He gave what he was able to give. We need to give whatever we're able to give, the Zera Shimshon says. Moses was rewarded greatly. His face shone. He had those beams. He was rewarded back from God. All God wants from us is whatever we can give. So, as two lessons, tying all of this together, number one is look how rich and special our Torah is, that every word is calculated and meaningful. We understood the word terumah, Torah mem, Torah 40. We understood the word veikhu, of really giving, but said as taking, and that importance in that realm of when we give, we're really taking, because the merit and opportunity is ours. And then the idea of the Mishkan, which was a collateral, God's home was a collateral. The Zera Shimshon is teaching us the power of words in the Torah and their spelling and their meaning. The next lesson, the last lesson I wanted to bring out, is this idea that all God wants from us is our best foot forward. He wants our effort. He wants anything that we can give. Whatever we have, He wants us to give. If you're scholarly, He wants you to share His wisdom. If you have great talents and traits and connections, He wants you to share that with the world and share that with Am Yisrael, with the Jewish population. If you have wealth and you're able to make a difference with what you have, that's what God wants you to give to Him. Not everyone can give the same thing. Someone who has the brains, someone who has the time to invest in that, that's what He wants from you. He wants your brain. The other person, He wants their heart. The other person, He wants their mouth. The other person, He wants their pocket. He wants different things from every person. But you know what He wants? He wants what you're best at. He wants your commitment. He wants your will. He wants your effort. We learned a lot of different things this evening, especially the understanding of the giving of the Torah and how the Mishkan, this tabernacle, was as an atonement, set up as an atonement for the mistakes the Jewish people made. But this is a very powerful lesson that we have to remind ourselves, that when we give, we are taking. So go out there and take those opportunities that God presents in front of you in giving in any way, because in essence, you are the one who is taking. Thank you, everyone.
See, Moses did not stop. The egel will not happen.
Moses did not.
He said, don't give me more money and gold and food.